The contention that the Enlightenment was not an early and precocious thing, but a much later idea, therefore has consequences for those civil religions. This book does not engage in a wrangle about words. Instead, it contends that arguments over the nature of the Enlightenment have hitherto been based on a false premise, and it offers a historiographical alternative. In the absence of such a revision, the subject has been vulnerable to the ascription to it of a bewildering variety of meanings. It has, therefore, been the site of controversies that proved impossible to resolve. Recently, one famous contest in particular has commanded attention. Modernists' images of the Enlightenment, celebrating its championing of reason, cosmopolitanism, democracy, toleration, and economic growth as components of a secular idea of progress, are still among the most powerful assumptions within the wider culture. Meanwhile, academic postmodernists frame negative critiques of that modernist model by attributing to the Enlightenment, which they also need to assume was a phenomenon, the rationalism that they contend led to totalitarianism, imperialism, racism, scientism, and sexism. In other words, to the hegemonic values of the West. The literature making use of these schools' interpretations for presentist purposes is large, and has grown on library shelves to the point where alternatives are difficult to find. The claims of that literature to moral authority still receive heartfelt reassertions. The Enlightenment may even be the key ground on which the contest between modernists and postmodernists is fought, and much depends on the outcome of the questions explored here. In 1982, at an early stage of that contest, Jean-François Lyotard wrote of that severe re-examination which postmodernity imposes on the thought of the Enlightenment, on the idea of a unitary end of history and of a subject. But the notion of the Enlightenment was developed before this binary alternative between modernism and postmodernism was framed, and more issues are examined in this book. Some may argue that the concept has lately been emptied of content and is now left only as a label for a chronological period, but this book offers evidence that the alleged contents are still fought over in many countries. The latest defensive strategy has been to extend the initially European Enlightenment into a global presence, but increasingly evident global diversities make a unified phenomenon less rather than more plausible. Accounts of the Enlightenment imagined as a phenomenon therefore differ greatly, even among modernists and even over such basic matters as the dating and geographical location of their subject. The present book contends that these disagreements cannot be fused into any single story, whether of progress in the minds of modernists or of regress in the minds of postmodernists. Rather, the disagreements are themselves the story. If what constitutes the Enlightenment is now a puzzle, what is the solution? Here I resolve the current impasse by historicising the concept, and when, in these chapters, I use this term to denote that concept, the Enlightenment appears within inverted commas. Without the inverted commas, the term signifies the still widespread assumption of the existence in the past of a phenomenon, the reality of which is mistakenly assumed to have been independent of its label.